The cell door hissed open, and two Cronin guards shoved something inside before sealing Marcus back in his concrete prison. He'd been expecting another beating, maybe reduced rations for the minor act of defiance he'd committed in the mines that morning. Instead, they'd brought him a gift. She couldn't have been more than 16 in human years, though with the Villani, it was hard to tell. Their species aged differently, their pale blue skin and silver hair giving them an ethereal quality. That made them seem fragile as glass. This one was more fragile than most, covered in bruises, her left arm hanging at an unnatural angle, her large violet eyes staring at nothing. "Enjoy your entertainment, human," one of the guards had sneered through the door's speaker. "Command. Thought you might appreciate some company." Marcus knelt beside the girl, his mining-scarred hands hovering uncertainly over her trembling form. She flinched when his shadow fell across her, curling into herself like a wounded animal. The sight made something twist painfully in his chest. "Hey," he whispered, his voice rough from the dust of the mines. "I'm not going to hurt you." The girl, he decided to call her Kira after his sister back on Earth, didn't respond. She just stared at the wall with those haunted eyes occasionally, letting out small whimpers that cut through Marcus like a blade. He'd been on Keth Prime for 3 years now, ever since the Cronin Syndicate had raided the colony ship Perseverance. 3 years of backbreaking labor in the crystalline mines, of watching fellow prisoners break under the weight of alien cruelty, of surviving on stubbornness and the fading hope that humanity would somehow find them. But this was different. This was innocence shattered for sport. Marcus had seen what the Cronin did for prisoners they considered broken. The Villani were a peaceful species, their homeworld conquered just 2 years ago. The survivors were distributed among various slave markets, with the most delicate ones reserved for the entertainment of high-ranking officials. Entertainment. The word left a bitter taste in his mouth. "You're safe now," he murmured, though they both knew it was a lie. Nothing was safe on Keth Prime, but something deep in his humanity, some core of defiance that years of imprisonment hadn't managed to crush, refused to let him look away. Grabbed his thin blanket and wrapped it around her shoulders. She flinched again but didn't pull away. "Progress. My name is Marcus," he said, settling against the opposite wall to give her space. "I'm from Earth, a place with blue skies and green trees. Maybe someday I'll tell you about it." The girl's breathing gradually slowed, her trembling subsiding to occasional shivers. Marcus stayed awake all night, watching over her, a fierce protectiveness burning in his chest that surprised him with its intensity. By morning, he'd made a decision that would change everything. He wouldn't use her as the Cronin intended. He wouldn't break her further for his own comfort. Instead, he'd do something that went against every survival instinct he'd developed in this place. He'd try to heal her. Every great journey starts with a few brave explorers. Sci-Fi stellar conflict is just beginning, and your support means everything. If you're hungry for HFY battles and tales of human valor against alien might, hit subscribe. It's free, and it helps us bring these frontlines to you. The first step was getting her to eat. Marcus had been saving portions of his meager rations, knowing that survival sometimes meant thinking beyond your next meal. He offered her small pieces of the protein paste they were given, speaking softly about nothing in particular, the weather on Earth, the sound of rain, the way his mother used to hum while cooking. Slowly, carefully, Kira began to respond. First just taking the food, then meeting his eyes for brief moments, finally whispering a single word, an accented standard, "Thank you." Marcus smiled, and for the first time in 3 years, it felt genuine. In choosing compassion over self-preservation, he'd found something the Cronin couldn't take from him, his humanity. The next few weeks fell into a careful rhythm. Marcus would return from his 16-hour shifts in the mines, exhausted and covered in crystal dust, to find Kira exactly where he'd left her, curled in the corner, wrapped in his blanket. But gradual changes were taking place. Her broken arm was healing, though it would never be quite right without proper medical care. The bruises were fading from purple to yellow. Most importantly, she was beginning to talk. The Cronin came in the night, she whispered one evening, her voice barely audible above the station's mechanical humming. "They said we were lucky to be chosen for special duties. My parents tried to hide me, but ... Marcus said nothing, just listened. He'd learned that sometimes the greatest kindness was simply bearing witness to someone's pain. They made me watch. Kira continued, her violet eyes distant. What they did to my family. They said it would make me more compliant. The rage that built in Marcus's chest was pure and clean, different from the desperate anger he'd felt during his own capture. This was protective fury, the kind that had driven humans to impossible acts of heroism throughout history. They were wrong, he said quietly. You're not compliant. You're surviving. Kira looked at him with something that might have been hope. On my world, we have a saying, the flower that bends in the storm stands again when the wind passes. But I feel broken, Marcus. Not bent, broken. Then we'll find new ways to stand, he replied. Humans are good at that. He began teaching her small things, how to move quietly in the cell, how to hide food, how to read the guards' moods by their footsteps. Basic survival skills that had kept him alive for 3 years. But more than that, he taught her about humanity's stubborn refusal to give up. My species fought 2 world wars, he told her one night, fashioning a crude splint for her arm from scraps of his uniform. We nearly destroyed ourselves twice, but we learned, we grew. We reached for the stars because we refused to accept that our small world was all there was. The Cronin say humans are weak, Kira said, testing the movement of her newly splinted arm, that your bodies are soft, your lifespan's short. Marcus chuckled, a sound that seemed alien in the sterile cell. They're not wrong. But they missed the point. We're not strong because we're tough. We're strong because we choose to be. The conversation was interrupted by the cell door's warning chime. Marcus quickly helped Kira assume her usual position in the corner, making sure she looked appropriately broken and defeated. The door hissed open to reveal Thane, the station's Cronin overseer. Thane was massive even by Cronin standards, his chitinous exoskeleton scarred from decades of violence. His compound eyes glittered with cruel intelligence as he surveyed the cell. How are you enjoying your gift, human? Thane's voice was like grinding stone. She's adequate, Marcus replied, forcing disgust into his voice. It was the hardest acting he'd ever done. Thane's mandibles clicked in what might have been amusement. Good. The Villani break so easily. This one was particularly responsive during her conditioning. Marcus felt Kira tense behind him, but she remained silent. Another small victory. However, Thane continued, there are reports that you've been unusual in your treatment of the gift, less aggressive than expected. Marcus's blood ran cold, but he kept his expression neutral. I'm taking my time with her, breaking her completely. A quick use would be wasteful. Indeed. Thane studied him for a long moment. You have 7 days to provide adequate entertainment, or we'll find more creative uses for the Villani. The mining foremen enjoy watching executions. The door sealed shut, leaving Marcus and Kira in suffocating silence. 7 days. 7 days to figure out how to save her life while maintaining the pretense that he was slowly destroying it. Marcus, Kira whispered, her voice steady despite the terror in her eyes. What will you do? He looked at her, really looked at her, and saw not a victim, but a survivor. Someone who had endured unimaginable cruelty and still found the strength to hope. I'm going to get you out of here, he said. Even if it kills me. The next morning brought a gift from the universe in the form of a mining accident. One of the crystal extractors had overloaded, sending shockwaves through the station's lower levels. In the chaos that followed, Marcus found himself working alongside Ben, a fellow human prisoner who'd been captured during the same raid. The emergency protocols are interesting, Ben whispered as they cleared debris from a collapsed tunnel. All security forces get redirected to potential breach points. Leaves the detention levels practically empty. Marcus glanced around, making sure their Cronin supervisor was out of earshot. How empty? Empty enough for someone desperate to try something stupid. That evening, Marcus began outlining his plan to Kira. It was insane, suicidal, and had maybe a 10% chance of success. But 10% was better than 0. The maintenance shafts connect to the docking bay, he explained, using his finger to trace patterns in the cell's dust. During shift changes, there's a 15-minute window where the security grid cycles through diagnostic mode. Kira studied the makeshift map with surprising intensity. And then? Then we steal a ship and hope we can figure out how to fly it before they vaporize us. She was quiet for a long moment, then said, "On my world, children learn a game called Leapstone. You jump from rock to rock across a stream, and if you hesitate too long, you fall. The secret is not to think about the distance." "Smart kid," Marcus said. "Don't think about the distance." Over the next 3 days, they prepared with the methodical patience of people who understood that failure meant death. Marcus used his knowledge of the station's layout to identify weak points in security. Kira, despite her injuries, proved surprisingly resourceful, her small size and natural agility making her ideal for reconnaissance. "Vellani were merchants before the conquest," she explained when Marcus expressed surprise at her tactical thinking. "We learned to read people, to find advantages in negotiation. It's not so different from finding weaknesses in a prison." "Your people sound remarkable," Marcus said. "Were," Kira corrected, her voice soft. "We were remarkable. Now we're just scattered memories." "No," Marcus said firmly. "You're still here. That makes your people alive." On the 4th day, Thane returned for an inspection. This time, he brought 2 guards and a portable pain inducer, a device that could incapacitate prisoners without permanent damage. "I've been thinking about your request for more time," Thane said, his mandibles clicking thoughtfully. "And I've decided that deadline was perhaps too generous." Marcus felt sweat beading on his forehead. You need to provide entertainment, now." The pain inducer hummed to life, its sensors focusing on Kira's huddled form. Marcus knew. What came next, Thane would use the device on her until Marcus broke and attacked him, providing the violent spectacle the Cronin enjoyed. But Marcus had learned something important during his 3 years on Keth Prime. Sometimes the most human thing you could do was refuse to give the aliens what they wanted. "No," he said simply. "Thane's compound eyes widened in surprise. "What?" I said. "No. I won't hurt her for your entertainment." The pain inducer's beam struck Kira, and she screamed, a sound that tore through Marcus like a physical blow. But instead of charging forward in rage, he did something unexpected. He knelt beside her, shielding her with his body, and began to sing. It was an old lullaby his mother had taught him, something about birds and freedom and the endless sky. His voice was rough, broken by years of mind dust and despair, but it was human. It was hope made audible. Kira's screams faded to whimpers, then to silence. She looked up at Marcus with wonder, as if seeing him clearly for the first time. Thane stood frozen, the pain inducer still active but somehow less effective. The song was doing something the alien couldn't understand. It was healing instead of breaking. "Enough," Thane snarled, powering down the device. "You have until tomorrow night, human. Provide entertainment, or I'll execute the Vellani myself." After the door sealed, Marcus and Kira sat in trembling silence. Finally she whispered, "Why didn't you let me suffer alone? It would have been easier for you." "Because," Marcus said, still holding her close, "humans don't leave each other behind. It's the one thing about us that never changes. Tomorrow night. 18 hours to execute an impossible plan. Time to see if hope was stronger than physics." The plan went wrong from the first moment. Marcus had counted on the shift change creating a 15-minute window of reduced security. Instead, he and Kira found themselves crawling through maintenance shafts while proximity alarms wailed throughout the station. Someone had discovered their escape attempt early. "This way," Marcus whispered, guiding Kira through the narrow passage. Behind them, the sound of cutting tools meant the Cronin had found their entry point. They emerged into a service corridor just as 3 guards rounded the corner. Marcus had perhaps 2 seconds to act before they'd be recaptured, and this time there would be no mercy. He did what humans had always done when facing impossible odds. He got creative. The emergency fire suppression system activated when Marcus tore the manual release lever from its housing. Pressurized foam filled the corridor, blinding the guards and sending them stumbling into each other. In the confusion, Marcus grabbed Kira's hand and ran. "The docking bay is 3 levels down," he panted as they sprinted through the stations. "Maze of corridors. There should be maintenance pods, maybe a small transport." "Marcus," Kira gasped, struggling to keep up with her injured arm. "I can't fly anything. Can you?" "I was a mining engineer before this," How hard can it be? They reached the docking bay to find it crawling with security forces. Every exit was blocked, every ship under guard. Marcus felt his heart sink as he realized their desperate gamble had failed. Then he saw it, a maintenance pod tucked behind a fuel storage unit. It was tiny, barely large enough for 2 people, designed for external repairs rather than long distance travel, but it had engines and life support. "Can you fit through that access panel?" Marcus asked, pointing to a ventilation grate near the pod dock. Kira nodded, already moving toward it. Her small frame and natural agility made her ideal for infiltration, one of the few advantages they had. While she worked on the grate, Marcus created a distraction. He grabbed a plasma torch from a nearby repair station and began cutting through the fuel storage unit's housing. The resulting sparks and alarms drew the guard's attention, giving Kira the opening she needed. She disappeared into the ventilation system like a ghost, reappearing moments later inside the maintenance pod. The external hatch opened silently, and Marcus sprinted toward it. 3 plasma bolts seared the air around him. The 4th one found its mark, burning through his shoulder and sending him sprawling. Through the haze of pain, he saw Cronin guards converging on his position. "Go!" he shouted to Kira. "Get out of here!" Instead, she did something that would have made any human proud. She fired up the pod's engines and flew it straight at the guards. The tiny craft wasn't designed for combat, but it made an excellent battering ram. Guards scattered as Kira brought the pod down in a controlled crash between Marcus and his pursuers. The access hatch popped open, and she grabbed his injured arm. "The flower that bends in the storm," she said, hauling him inside. With surprising strength. "Now we stand together." Marcus stumbled into the pilot's seat, his vision blurring from blood loss. The controls were alien but intuitive: throttle, directional thrusters, life support. Basic physics applied regardless of who built the machine. "Hold on," he muttered, engaging the engines. The pod lurched forward, scraping against the docking bay walls as they accelerated toward the exit. Behind them, larger ships were powering up for pursuit, their weapon systems coming online. They burst into open space with alarms screaming and warning lights flashing. The pod's hull was compromised, life support failing, and they had maybe 10 minutes of air left. But they were free. "Where do we go?" Kira asked, monitoring the approaching pursuit craft. Marcus pointed toward a distant star cluster. "There. The Terran Defense Force has a listening post in that system. If we can reach it... That's 50 light years away," Kira said quietly. "This pod doesn't have a hyperdrive." Marcus looked at her, this brave alien girl who had chosen to save him instead of herself, and smiled. "Then we'll have to be creative." He began overloading the pod's power systems, redirecting everything to the engines. It was insane. They'd burn out in minutes, or the ship would tear itself apart, or both. But sometimes insanity was the most human response to impossible circumstances. The pod accelerated beyond its design specifications, racing toward the star cluster as Cronin fighters closed in from behind. Energy beams lanced past them, growing more accurate with each passing second. "Marcus," Kira said, her voice oddly calm, "if we don't make it, I want you to know you saved me. Not just from the station, but from forgetting what kindness looks like." "We're going to make it," Marcus said, though the console was showing system failures across the board. Humans are too stubborn to die quietly. The first pursuit ship opened fire in earnest, its weapons designed to disable rather than destroy. They wanted prisoners, not corpses. But Marcus had no intention of being captured again. He pushed the engines past their breaking point, and the pod shot forward like a bullet from a gun. Behind them, the Cronin ships fell back, unable to match their reckless speed. They were free. Dying, but free. The pod's engine died 12 hours later, leaving them drifting in the void between stars. Life support was failing, the hull was cracked, and they were still 30 light years from the nearest Terran outpost. By any reasonable measure, they were doomed. Marcus had never felt more alive. "Tell me about your world," he said, working frantically to reroute power from non-essential systems. Before the conquest. Kira floated beside him in the pod's cramped interior, her injured arm finally free from its makeshift splint. "It was beautiful," cities that grew like flowers reaching toward the sky. We had festivals where everyone would sing together, millions of voices creating harmony. It sounds wonderful, Marcus said, managing to coax a few more hours of life support from the failing systems. You'll rebuild it. How can you be sure? Marcus paused in his work, looking at her with the certainty of someone who had witnessed the impossible. Because you're still here. Because you chose to save me instead of yourself. Because you remembered what kindness looks like, even after everything they did to you. As if summoned by his words, a new star appeared in the view screen, growing brighter, moving toward them. A ship. Cronin? Kira whispered. Marcus studied the approaching vessel, his heart pounding. Then he saw the familiar configuration of Terran engines, the blue-white glow of human technology. No, he breathed. It's the cavalry. The rescue ship was a Terran Defense Force patrol craft, probably investigating the strange energy readings from their overloaded engine. As it drew closer, Marcus could see the familiar sight of human faces behind the viewports. Unknown vessel, this is Captain Torres of the TDF Vigilant, came the radio transmission. Are you in distress? Marcus keyed the transmitter, his voice cracking with emotion. This is Marcus Chun, formerly of the colony ship Perseverance. I have a refugee aboard and request immediate assistance. A pause, then, Marcus Chun? You were listed as killed in action 3 years ago. Reports of my death have been greatly exaggerated, Marcus said, borrowing the old human saying. How did you find us? We've been tracking escape pods from Keth Prime for the past week. Yours is the 7th we've picked up. Marcus felt something like electricity run through his veins. 7th? The word is spreading, Captain Torres explained as the rescue ship's tractor beam locked onto their pod. Human prisoners are breaking out across the sector. Whatever you did on Keth Prime, it started something. As they were brought aboard the Vigilant, Marcus realized what had happened. His choice to save Kira instead of using her hadn't been witnessed by just the two of them. Other prisoners had heard the story through the station's communication networks. They had seen a human refuse to become what his captors wanted him to be. The rescue ship's medical bay was a blur of activity as doctors worked on both Marcus and Kira. But between the treatments and debriefings, Marcus learned the full scope of what their escape had triggered. 17 prison stations across the sector, Captain Torres reported. Mass breakouts, coordinated resistance movements, guard uprisings. The Cronin are calling it the human contagion, but we prefer a different term. What's that? Marcus asked. Hope. 3 months later, Marcus stood on the observation deck of the Terran Defense Force flagship Defiance, watching as the first wave of liberation ships moved toward Keth Prime. Beside him, Kira wore the uniform of a Villani resistance fighter, her arm fully healed and her eyes bright with purpose. Your people are strange, she said, watching the massive fleet deploy. You could have left us to fight our own battles. Where's the fun in that? Marcus replied. Besides, you saved me first. Humans always pay their debts. The battle for Keth Prime lasted 6 hours. The Cronin, faced with a coordinated human assault backed by liberated alien species, surrendered without firing a shot. The age of easy conquest was over. Years later, when historians wrote about the human liberation wars, they would focus on the tactics, the technology, the grand strategic movements that freed dozens of worlds. But Marcus knew the truth was simpler. It had started with a choice. A decision to show kindness instead of cruelty, to protect instead of exploit, to hope instead of despair. It had started with a human refusing to break. The flower that bends in the storm, Kira said, watching as the last of the prison ships was liberated. Now we all stand together, Marcus finished. In the end, that's what made humans special. Not their technology or their tactics, but their stubborn refusal to let the universe make them into something they weren't. They were the species that chose compassion over convenience, that saved their enemies' children, that sang lullabies in the darkness. They were the species that would never, ever give up. And that made all the difference.